The first thing I heard was screaming, but it wasn't mine. It was the house. A deep, twisting howl rolling through the walls like something alive was being ripped from its own bones. Flames shot through the windows, so fast the glass didn't even have time to shatter clean. It burst outward in sharp, angry shards that rained across the porch like broken teeth. Heat slammed into my skin before my mind could catch up, before grief could even form into words. The boards under my feet pulsed hot enough to make me step back, barefoot, stumbling, breath snatched right out my chest. That house didn't burn quiet. It burned like it recognized me, like it knew exactly whose life it was taking with it. Smoke punched upward in thick, black waves. The roof groaned, sagging at the center like a dying animal, trying one last time to lift its head. Every beam, every nail, every memory folded in on itself. I could taste ash on my tongue, sharp, metallic, bitter enough to dry the back of my throat. I hadn't told y'all my name yet. I'm Geneva, and that morning, I watched the only home I ever built cough itself into nothing. The porch railing scorched my palm when I reached for it, and I jerked back so hard my shoulder popped. Sparks leaped toward me, small, vicious things, dancing across the boards like they were celebrating what they'd claimed. I stepped off the porch, heart pounding, legs weak, feeling heat crawl up my back like fingers pushing me forward. Inside the walls, nails snapped one by one. Fast, sharp, mean. My husband's handiwork, dying in staccato bursts. I kept moving through the yard, smoke wrapping around me until I couldn't tell where my grief ended, and the fire began. My breath came out in shallow gasps. My vision blurred. My skin felt tight, as if the flames were trying to mark me before I got away. By the time I reached the fence line, sweat and soot had mixed together on my face, sliding down my chin like dark raindrops. The oak tree leaned over me, glowing orange at the tips of its branches, but still standing tall like it refused to let the fire rewrite its history. And as the yard drowned in smoke, another scene, clear as clean water, rose inside me. A tiny boy in my classroom doorway, shoulders hunched, shoes worn thin at the toes. He held his backpack against his chest like he was guarding the last piece of himself. When I offered him a lunch that wasn't scraped together or thrown at him, his hands shook hard enough to rattle the juice pouch inside the bag. He didn't lift his head until halfway through eating, and even then, only for a second. I knew hunger when I saw it. Knew fear, too. That boy carried both like shadows taped to his ribs. He never forgot me, and I never forgot the way he said thank you without saying a word. If you're watching this, baby, comment where you're tuning in from. Holding on to someone's presence gets a woman through moments like this. A burst of heat surged behind me, louder, heavier. I turned just in time to see the roof buckle inward, collapsing with a roar that shook the ground. Sparks shot up toward the sky like the fire was trying to write its name across the clouds. Everything I owned, everything I prayed over, everything I stitched, cooked in, cried inside, gone in one long breath. Dust whipped around my legs. My chest heaved. The world behind me glowed violent and orange, lighting up the field like sunset had arrived early and angry. I wiped my face, felt soot smear across my cheek, tasted salt at the corner of my lips. I had nothing left but the clothes melting into my skin and the memory of one hungry boy who grew into a man with power in his hands. My voice cracked when I spoke, barely more than a whisper carried on hot wind. I guess I gotta go to his place. And that's the moment the rest of my life started shifting. The walk from the road to Carl's porch felt longer than the stretch between my burning house and the fence line. Smoke still clung to my clothes, settled in my hair, soaked into my skin like it was trying to hide inside me. I didn't bother brushing it off. My legs were trembling too hard to waste strength on pretending I wasn't falling apart. The porch light was on even though it was daylight, a habit Sienna picked up from some home show she liked, calling it intentional ambience. The light hit the soot on my arms and made it look darker, harsher, like the fire had followed me here. I knocked once, soft, more out of habit than hope. The door cracked open just an inch, and I saw her first, Sienna, with her hair pulled back tight and her robe cinched at the waist like she was holding her house together with string. Her eyes flicked over me from head to foot, moving slow, taking in every stain, every smear of ash, every sign I'd been through something she couldn't survive in her best dress. "What are you doing here?" she said, her voice flat. Not curious, not worried, just irritated. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. The smoke had dried my throat raw, and grief had taken the rest. Then she pushed the door wider, but not enough to let me in. Just enough for me to see Carl standing behind her. His face was tight, jaw locked, eyes shifting between me and the floor like he was trying to choose who deserved his shame more. His work shirt hung loose around his shoulders. He hadn't even changed out of it. Maybe he rushed to the door thinking I was a delivery driver or trouble or one of the neighbors. But not his mama. Sienna crossed her arms. "You'll ruin my expensive furniture coming in here like that. I've got no place for a homeless woman." The words hit harder than the heat from the fire. Not because of her voice, but because Carl didn't flinch. I watched him waiting to see if he'd step forward, maybe even put a hand on her arm, something to show he remembered who raised him. But he didn't move. He just nodded once, small, subtle, like he was agreeing to something he didn't fully understand, but still didn't have the courage to stop. That nod, it emptied something in me I didn't even know was still full. I looked past them into the house, one step inside the doorway, and saw the blanket draped across the couch, the blue one with the crooked squares, the one he tore climbing Miss Turner's pecan tree when he was 9. I stitched it back together with mismatched thread because I didn't have anything that blended that day. He cried when he found out it was fixed, said it felt like magic. Seeing it sitting there, neat and folded, a piece of our history tossed on furniture I wasn't good enough to touch. I felt something inside, my chest pinched tight. Sienna shifted, impatient. "Look, we're busy. You can call later." Carl wouldn't look at me. Not once. I swallowed, tasting the ash still clinging to the back of my tongue. The heat from my clothes pressed against my skin, mixing with the cold coming from their doorway. I nodded too, slow, the way a person does when their heart sits heavy, but their dignity refuses to fall. "All right," I said softly. I stepped back down the porch steps, the boards creaking like they remembered my footsteps from holidays past. My vision blurred, not from smoke, but from the weight of something breaking inside me. The sky behind the house still glowed orange from the wildfire's echo, painting everything in a light that didn't feel like it belonged in this world. When my foot hit the bottom step, I whispered so low the wind almost swallowed it, "Lord, give me one reason not to cry." My hand slipped into my pocket, fingers brushing the cold edge of the old flip phone, and I reached for it. The flip phone felt heavier than it ever had, like the years I avoided using it were suddenly sitting in my palm. I wiped my thumb across the screen, smearing soot in a crooked line, then flipped it open. The buttons were small, stubborn, and old, but the number I needed was already there, saved under one simple word. Langston. I hadn't pressed that name since the day he handed me the phone. Told me I'd never need to explain anything if I ever called, just breathe, and he'd come. I laughed at him back then, told him he was talking like somebody's rich uncle. Turns out, I didn't know how right he'd become. The night air around me was cooling fast, but my hands were still shaking from the fire. I hit the call button. The ring barely chirped once. Hello. His voice was deeper than I remembered, but still carried the softness he used to hide behind. I tried to speak, but my breath wobbled. He sensed it. Ma'am, he said gently, where are you? I swallowed hard. My pride was fighting every word in my throat, trying to keep me strong, when all I felt was small. I'm near Carl's place. I managed, my voice scratchy from smoke, and something heavier. The fire took everything. There was no silence on his end, only breath. A sharp inhale, then stillness. I'm coming, he said. His tone shifted the way a storm changes the sky, quiet but full. Stay right where you are. He didn't ask about the fire, didn't question why I called him and not 911. Didn't ask if I was safe, hungry, scared. He just said he was coming. My chest tightened with something that felt like relief mixed with shame. My voice trembled when I answered, but my pride straightened my spine. All right, baby, I'll be right here. I ended the call and let my hand drop to my side. The phone swung a little, hanging open like it was breathing for me. I stood on the gravel, heat from the wildfire still warming the back of my legs, night air cooling the front. And then, like old memories coming up through smoke, I found myself back in my classroom, standing over a skinny boy at the back table. He kept his head bent low, back hunched like he was trying to disappear inside himself. His backpack sat in his lap, faded red fabric peeling at the seams, one strap tied in a knot. Two boys had laughed at him earlier, loud enough for the whole class to hear. He pretended he didn't care, pretended the noise wasn't pointed like a blade. But when I put a hand on his desk, he finally looked up. Tears had dropped silently onto the zipper of that worn-out bag, leaving tiny dark dots. I sat on the edge of the desk beside him and said, "Some things ain't supposed to impress nobody but the one carrying it." He didn't say a word, but he breathed differently after that, like somebody finally handed him space. The memory faded as wind curled around my ankles. I blinked, clearing smoke from my lashes, and realized the night had gone still, too still. No crickets, no cars, no faraway laughter. Just a low, humming vibration crawling into the ground beneath my feet. A soft thumping grew behind the tree-line, slow at first, then quicker, like a giant heartbeat trying to sync with my own. The wind shifted again, rougher this time, pulling at the hem of my skirt. My hair lifted off my neck, strands whipping across my face. Dust scattered across the road, swirling in tight circles. I turned toward the sky, my pulse stumbling. Through the branches, lights cut through the darkness. White, clean, determined. The sound deepened, pushing air against my chest with each rotation. The helicopter was already lowering, The helicopter settled in the clearing with a force that pressed the air flat, beating the dust into circles around my feet. I raised a hand to shield my eyes, skirt whipping against my legs, hair pulling at the pins that barely held it. When the blade slowed enough for me to see clearly, the side door swung open. Langston climbed down first. Not rushed, not dramatic, just steady, like a man who'd already made a decision before his feet touched the ground. His shoes hit the dirt with a soft thud, shining far too clean for the mess I'd called him into. The second he saw me, clothes smeared with ash, cheeks streaked with smoke, shoulders slumped from a day no human heart should survive, his whole face changed. Not with anger, not with pity, but with something warm and direct, the same emotion he used to hide like it was dangerous to let it out. He walked up to me slow enough for me to breathe, fast enough for me to feel chosen. His hand slid onto my shoulders gently, thumbs brushing the edges of soot on my collarbone like he was checking if I was real or just a bad dream. "You all right?" he asked quietly, like the question was meant for my soul and not my skin. I nodded once, even though everything in me felt cracked open. His eyes softened, not wide, not dramatic, but deep, protective in a way only a child who'd once been broken knows how to be. That look took me back to a winter afternoon in my classroom. He was 12, skinny, eyes too tired for a child. I brought him a plate from the teacher's lounge, meatloaf, mashed potatoes, a warm roll. He sat at his desk, but didn't touch it right away, didn't look up. He just stared at the steam rising from the potatoes like it was something holy. Halfway through the meal, only then he glanced up, and I remember thinking, this boy ain't eating food. He's swallowing hope. The wind shifted, snapping me back to the present. Langston's suit jacket lifted at the edges, catching the late light. He stepped back, eyes scanning the road, the trees, the direction I'd come from, taking in more than I said. "Which house?" he asked. I didn't have to point. I just turned my head toward Carl's place, my feet already carrying the memory of that porch. Langston's jaw tightened the moment he saw it. Nothing loud, just a small shift, the way a storm decides what direction it wants to move in. He didn't say a word. The air changed around us. It wasn't heat or cold or fear. It was purpose. He started walking toward the house, each step sharper than the last. His shoulders squared themselves, suit brushing against his frame like armor. I followed behind him, not touching him, but feeling tethered to the ground he walked on. Every inch of him looked like trouble coming wrapped in calm. The closer we got, the quieter the world became. Even the cicadas seemed to hush. Langston climbed the 3 porch steps without hesitation, his hand brushing the railing where my fingers had clung earlier. He paused there for half a heartbeat, just long enough to feel the history, the rejection, the sting that still sat in the wood. Then he lifted his hand and knocked. Once. Firm. A sound that didn't echo. It landed. Behind the door, footsteps shifted, quick and uneven. A shadow moved. I saw the curtain twitch. Langston didn't move, didn't blink, didn't lean back. The doorknob rattled, turned, opened. Carl stood there, not just surprised, shaking. His eyes flicked from Langston to me and back, like the truth had just walked up his steps wearing a suit he couldn't ignore. And the air between all 3 of us tightened, ready to break. Carl's hand was still on the doorknob when Langston stepped forward. Not aggressive, not rushed, just close enough that Carl had to lift his chin to meet his eyes. The porch light glowed across Langston's face, cutting sharp lines into his expression. Calm on the surface, something colder underneath. Sienna stood behind Carl, robe pulled tight, breath stuck high in her throat. She held her arm across her stomach, like she was bracing for a blow she couldn't see. The smell of my burnt clothes floated between us, settling in the doorway like a witness. Langston didn't glance at her, didn't glance at me. He kept his eyes locked on Carl, as if the rest of the world didn't matter. Then he said it, quiet, precise, final. Get a lawyer. Carl's jaw twitched. The words seemed to land in his chest, knocking the air out of him. He blinked once, twice, mouth parting just enough to show he didn't understand why he needed one, but he understood enough to be scared. The effect was instant. Sienna gasped behind him. A thin, sharp sound she tried to swallow. Her hand clutched her robe harder, knuckles widening. Wealthy people didn't toss legal instructions around like confetti. When somebody with money says that, it usually means somebody else is standing on ground they don't actually own. Langston's tone hadn't risen even a notch, but that calmness carried more threat than shouting ever could. It sounded like a man who didn't have to repeat himself. Carl finally found his voice. Why, he whispered, eyes darting between us like he was searching for a hint, a clue, a lifeline. Langston didn't answer him. Instead, he turned to me slowly like the shift was a punctuation mark, not a gesture. His eyes held the same softness they used to when he was 12 and didn't know how to look an adult in the face for too long. You always deserved better, he said. It didn't sound like a compliment. It sounded like an apology the world owed me for years. My throat tightened. I hadn't wanted trouble, hadn't wanted a scene, hadn't wanted any of this. I'd given that house to Carl because blessings were meant to be shared, not hoarded. My mama raised me to believe the full table wasn't meant for one pair of hands. When Langston gave me that house years ago, big and beautiful, and more than I ever needed, I handed it to my son without hesitation. I wanted him to start life with a roof that didn't leak, with walls that held stability instead of struggle. I never thought my gift would become my humiliation. Carl swallowed hard, trying to pull himself together. "Mama, what's going on?" he asked, voice cracking. Before I could answer, Sienna grabbed his arm. "Carl, close the door," she hissed, panic trembling through every syllable. "Don't let this get bigger. He's overreacting. He's just—" Langston lifted one hand, just slightly, not toward her, just upward, like he was done hearing nonsense. She fell silent instantly. He didn't raise his voice, didn't lean forward, didn't need to. Authority rolled off him like heat from the fire that took my home. Carl shifted his weight. "Mr. Ward, sir, I don't understand what we—" Langston cut him off with a breath. Not a word. A breath. Carl's shoulders caved in. His eyes dropped. He finally looked at his own feet the way Langston once did in my classroom. The silence stretched thin between us. I could feel the house watching me, the same house I'd given with love, now standing tall behind a door that refused me entry. Shame burned deeper than the ash still clinging to my skin. Langston stepped back, straightened his jacket, and looked at me again. "Miss Geneva, let's go." And just like that, the porch didn't feel like theirs anymore. It felt like a place I'd outgrown. The inside of that helicopter felt like another planet. No smoke, no ash, no smell of burnt wood, just cool air and soft leather, and a stillness my body didn't know what to do with. My hands shook so much I had to sit on them to keep them from rattling against my knees. Langston sat across from me, seatbelt strapped, shoulders relaxed like this was any other Tuesday ride. The blades thundered above us, but in the cabin it was a muffled roar, like the world outside was trying to talk through a closed door. He studied my face for a moment, eyes moving over every streak of soot, every tired line, every bit of hurt I hadn't had time to hide. Then he leaned in just enough for me to hear him clear over the hum. That house, he said, his voice low, was never supposed to belong to him outright. I blinked, not understanding. I knew he bought it. I knew he gave it to me. I knew I passed it on to Carl, because I didn't need all that space. My little farmhouse, back when it still stood, had been enough for me and my memories. What do you mean? I asked, my voice steadying little by little. He clasped his hands together, thumbs circling each other as he talked. When I bought that place, he said, the lawyers set it up so it stayed tied to your name. Not his, not hers, yours. That way, nobody could use it against you or take it from you if something went wrong. It was meant to protect your taxes, your security, your future. He watched me carefully as his words sank in. I stared back at him, the vibration of the helicopter running through my bones, mind trying to catch up. I blessed that child with a crown he never knew he was wearing, gave him a kingdom, and he turned the gate on me. So, Carl, I started slowly pushing each word through my tired chest. He'd been living there on my grace this whole time. Langston nodded once. He's been an occupant because you allowed it. He said, the way it sits on paper, the power still leans your way. They got comfortable and started acting like the house put itself in their hands. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. My fingers tightened around the edge of the seat, nails pressing into the leather. It wasn't just hurt now. Something sharper crept in behind it. Clarity. All these years, I thought I'd stepped out of the blessing and left it for him. Turns out I'd been standing inside it the whole time and didn't even know. I looked out the small window. The land below rolled past in strips of dark and light, the black scar where my farmhouse used to be stretching across the field like a wound that didn't know how to close. Langston's voice softened. I used that trust to keep you safe, he said, to make sure if anybody ever tried to push you out, they'd have to answer to more than just you. I let the words sit between us. My heart ached, not just from what happened on that porch, but from the simple truth sitting under all of it. I had given my son more than a roof. I'd given him a chance to stand in something solid, and he used that solid ground to turn his back on me. Why you care this much? I asked quietly. He glanced out the window, jaw tightening, then back at me. I used to ride my bike past your farmhouse after I left town, he admitted. Didn't go up, didn't knock, just checked to see if your light was on, to make sure the place was still standing. You were the first person who made me feel like I wasn't disposable. The image of him pedaling by, grown and successful, looking at my little house from a distance like it was a lighthouse, pushed tears right up to the edge of my eyes. The fire took that house. My son took that door. But this boy I once fed refused to let them take my name too. The helicopter tilted slightly as it changed direction, City lights beginning to rise in the distance like a new kind of fire, controlled, intentional. Langston leaned closer, elbows resting on his knees, eyes locked onto mine. "You ready," he asked, his words slow and deliberate, "to take back what you gave?" The helicopter leveled out above the city, the lights below stretching into neat little rows like somebody had laid out the world with a ruler. I watched them blink through the window, soft, distant, untouched by the kind of ruin that had crawled across my land earlier that day. For the first time since the fire, the tightness in my chest loosened just enough for me to breathe without wincing. Langston waited, not leaning forward, not rushing me, just giving me room to sit with the question he'd asked. Was I ready to take back what I gave? I curled my fingers around the seatbelt strap, rubbing the fabric slow. My hands were clean, now. He'd handed me a warm towel in the cabin before we took off, but the feeling of soot still clung to my skin like the fire had left fingerprints only I could see. "I ain't looking for revenge," I finally said, voice soft but steadier than before. "I just want my dignity back." He nodded once, like he'd been expecting that answer. "I'll handle the rest," he said quietly, with clean hands. "I promise." Clean hands. That mattered more than any contract or threat ever could. I didn't want him tearing anybody down on my behalf. I didn't want a war on my doorstep. I didn't want shouting or courtroom speeches or police lights flashing in front of Carl's house. I just wanted the weight put back where it belonged. Sometimes the hardest thing in this life is choosing yourself, especially when choosing yourself means standing in a light you taught everybody else to walk toward. My whole life, I poured into people, students, neighbors, my son, my husband, God rest his soul. I'd stretched myself thin trying to make sure everybody else felt whole. Now here I was, with nothing but smoke in my hair and a man who owed me nothing waiting for my answer, like my voice was still the safest place he'd ever known. Langston shifted slightly, resting one elbow on the armrest, looking at me with a softness that didn't belong in a billionaire's eyes. "You were the only adult who saw me," he admitted. "Not what I wore, not what I didn't have, not what people whispered. Just me." The words pulled me back to that classroom again, him hunched over a desk too big for his small body, trying to fix a broken zipper with fingers that trembled from hunger. The memory had weight to it, the kind that wraps around you long after you think you've put it down. I swallowed, feeling my throat tighten. "That was my job," I whispered. He shook his head. "No. Your job was to teach me math, maybe history, but you fed me, protected me, believed in me, loved me without saying the word. That wasn't a job. That was mercy." The air in the cabin warmed around his confession, pressing on a part of me I hadn't touched in years. Not since Carl grew old enough to decide distance tasted better than closeness. Mercy. I'd always believed God gave it through people who didn't even realize they were holding it. The helicopter dipped slightly as the pilot adjusted course. The seat hummed beneath me, steady as a heartbeat someone else was controlling. Langston looked down at the phone in his lap, screen glowing faintly against the dim cabin. "You sure this is what you want?" he asked. I met his eyes. "I want to stand up in my own name again." He nodded. No smile, no dramatic sigh of relief, just acceptance, as clean and simple as a door opening instead of closing. Then he tapped the screen and lifted the phone to his ear. His voice didn't rise, didn't sharpen, didn't carry threat. It carried truth. Reassign her trust, he said. Immediately. The word immediately settled in the cabin like a stone dropped into still water. Quiet, deep, final. And that's where the moment ended. Morning light pushed through the hotel curtains like somebody easing a blessing into a room without wanting to startle anybody. I sat on the edge of the bed, wearing the soft clothes Langston's assistant left for me, simple slacks and a cotton top, nothing fancy, but clean. My skin still smelled faintly of smoke, no matter how long I stood under the shower. Some things don't wash off in one try. A gentle knock tapped at the door. Not rushed, not nervous, just respectful. When I opened it, a man in a neat charcoal suit stepped in, holding a slim leather folder. His glasses caught the light. His voice was steady, the kind of calm that comes from years of knowing exactly what paperwork can do. "Miss Brooks," he said with a small nod. "I'm Elias Grant, Mr. Ward's legal advisor." I motioned him toward the small table near the window. He laid the folder down like it held something fragile. We moved quickly, he continued. "Mr. Ward instructed us to reinstate the original beneficiary position for the property." He flipped the folder open, and I saw my name printed across the top of the first page. Clear, bold, unarguable. The house, my house, returned to me on paper, in power, in truth. The trust was designed to protect your interests. Elias said, "This reinstatement simply restores what was intended from the beginning. Your son and his wife may continue living there if you permit it, but all decision-making authority reverts to you." I stared at the words, not breathing for a moment. God doesn't always slap. Sometimes he taps you on the shoulder and lets you feel the weight of his quiet. That house was meant to be mine. I murmured, not in pride, just in understanding. I gave it to Carl because I wanted him and his wife to start life with something solid. Elias nodded. "And you were generous, but generosity shouldn't cost dignity." His words settled on me like a blanket I didn't know I needed. I swallowed. Will he lose everything? The question came out softer than I intended, but truth always slips through the cracks. Elias folded his hands. "Only if you choose to demand it. The trust is yours. What happens next depends entirely on your decision." My breath left in a tight ache. I didn't want destruction. I didn't want to see my son beg or break. I just wanted him to remember who held him when he was small, who stayed awake with him when fevers ran high, who stitched every hole in his childhood until he became a man too busy to remember where he came from. I pushed the folder closer to me, fingertips brushing the edge of the paper. The weight of it felt nothing like revenge. It felt like balance. Elias slid a pen across the table. "You have the option to sign now or later. There is no urgency on our end." I stared at the pen, watched the metal glint, listened to the faint hum of the air conditioning unit filling the silent corners of the room. Then I signed, not for power, not for punishment, for myself. Elias closed the folder gently. "We'll file this immediately." When he stood to leave, he paused at the doorway. "Miss Brooks, if I may, you're handling this with more grace than most." Grace, a word that feels like cotton and stone at the same time. After he left, I sat alone at the table, hands still resting on the leather folder. The city moved somewhere beyond the glass. Cars, footsteps, strangers living lives untouched by the ashes that trailed me. I pressed my palm flat on the table, steadying the tremor in my chest. I didn't want Carl ruined. I didn't want Sienna humiliated. I wanted them to understand the hurt they caused, to see, not fear, the woman who'd given them everything. My voice barely rose above a whisper as I said the only words I knew were true. I want them to see me, not fear me. The sunrise crept over the horizon like it was trying not to disturb anybody, slipping its light across the hotel room floor in long, warm strips. I stood at the window with my arms folded tight, watching the sky shift from deep purple to the kind of gold that looks soft even when your heart isn't. I could still feel the pen between my fingers from yesterday, still hear the calm in Elias's voice, still feel the weight of reclaiming something I never should have surrendered. I didn't ask for revenge. I didn't ask for ruin. I asked for dignity. And dignity always comes quiet, as the sun lifted itself fully over the city. I let my thoughts drift to a different morning, years back, standing on Carl's college campus, watching him walk into his dorm for the first time. His backpack bounced with every step. His smile was small, shy, the way it always got when he was excited but didn't want anybody to see it. He turned before he reached the door and waved at me. It was a simple wave, but it felt like a promise. Now, I didn't know where that promise had gone. I pressed my hand against the window glass, steadying my breath, letting the warmth settle into the scars the night had left behind. Somewhere across town, inside a house that had my name written on its bones, my son was waking up to a truth I never wanted to use against him. Not long after the sun cleared the buildings, the envelope was delivered. No sheriff, no uniform, no pounding on the door, just a quiet knock from a courier dressed in navy slacks who handed the envelope to Carl with 2 words, "For you." Inside, the documents lay flat and final, my name reinstated as the sole beneficiary, authority restored to me, occupancy listed as permitted by discretion. No accusations, no threats, just truth written in a language even fear couldn't argue with. Carl stood at the counter staring at the papers, fingers trembling on the edges. The kitchen around him held the early morning stillness, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards cooling after the night, the faint clink of the envelope sliding across the table when he dropped it. Sienna's panic hit first. "What is this?" she hissed, snatching the paper too fast. "Why is her name? Why is this saying, Carl, what is happening?" He didn't answer. His voice had been knocked out of him, the kind of silence that makes a grown man remember his manners. Sienna kept flipping through the pages, hands shaking, breath quickening. "Is she taking the house? Carl, answer me. Is she?" He sank into the nearest chair. Not dramatically, not angrily, just slowly, like his knees decided they didn't trust him anymore. His elbows dropped onto the table, his head lowering into his hands. Sienna hovered behind him, robe brushing the back of the chair, her words coming fast and thin. "You need to call somebody. A real lawyer. Your mother's lost her mind. She's trying to take everything we—" Carl lifted one hand, palm out, stopping her mid-sentence. He didn't look at her. He just stared at the envelope. His voice came out low, barely there. This house was hers. She froze. And in that pause, the truth stretched between them like a wire pulled too tight. I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. Some truths unfold all on their own. Back in the hotel room, I poured myself a small cup of tea, from the courtesy tray. The steam curled up to my face as I sat down in the armchair by the window. The city felt quiet in a way only early morning can offer, a kind of peace that doesn't erase anything but lets you breathe through it. I'd just lifted the cup to my lips when my phone buzzed. I looked at the screen. Carl. The ache in my chest squeezed tight, then loosened. I answered. His voice cracked on the first word. Mama, please come talk to me. The house looked different when I walked back toward it. Same siding, same porch light, glowing even in daylight, but the air around it felt heavier, like the truth Elias delivered had settled into the walls and was waiting for me to step inside. I climbed the porch steps with the same quiet dignity I had the day they shut the door in my face, only now the boards didn't creak under shame. They creaked under purpose. Carl opened the door before I reached it. His eyes were swollen, red around the edges, the kind of tired that comes from crying alone. He stepped aside without a word, shoulders slumped like a man who finally met the weight of his own choices. I walked in slow, letting my eyes settle on the same living room that once refused me. The sunlight cut across the floor, landing on the blue blanket draped over the couch, the one I'd stitched for him when he was little. That fabric should have felt like memory. Instead, it felt like a witness. Carl swallowed hard. Mama, I ain't got an excuse. His voice crumbled at the edges. I followed her lead. Not my heart. I didn't move toward him. Didn't speak right away. The truth don't need a microphone. It whispers. And silence was whispering loud enough for both of us. He rubbed the back of his neck, pacing a few steps before turning back to me. I knew you was standing at the door. I knew you needed help, and I let her talk over the part of me that knew better. I held his gaze, not with anger, but with the steady kind of disappointment a mother carries when she realizes her child's grown body learned how to bend in all the wrong places. That ain't how I raised you, I said softly. Carl pressed his lips together. Eyes lowering like the floor was the only thing brave enough to look at him. I know. I ain't been myself. His voice cracked. Mama, I messed up. My breath eased out slow. I didn't need an apology wrapped in poetry. I needed truth. And he was finally offering it. I took a small step deeper into the house, glancing toward the kitchen. A stack of unopened envelopes sat on the counter. Thick ones, thin ones, some marked urgent in bold red letters. Bills, notices, warnings, all the things he never said a word about. Money trouble, shame, pressure, secrets. It painted a picture that didn't excuse him, but it filled in the shadows he'd been hiding behind. I picked up one envelope, then another. The dates stretched back months. You been carrying all this alone? I asked quietly. He nodded, wiping his face with the back of his hand. I didn't want you to worry. Sienna, she likes things to look perfect. And I didn't want her to feel less than. My heart pulled tight, trying to impress a woman who couldn't open a door for me, but couldn't open her own bills either. The floorboards behind us creaked. Sienna stepped into the doorway, arms folded across her chest, robe pulled tight like armor. Her eyes flicked from me to Carl, then to the stack of envelopes on the counter. She pressed her lips thin. So, are you taking the house? Her voice wasn't loud. It wasn't nervous. It wasn't even angry. It was afraid dressed up as attitude. Carl's shoulders tensed. He turned halfway toward her, half toward me, like he didn't know which direction held safety. I placed the envelopes back on the counter, smoothing my hand over them lightly. The weight of the moment pressed in. Carl's guilt, Sienna's fear, the truth sitting between us like a third presence in the room. I looked at Sienna, not with fire, not with cruelty, but with a calm that made the air shift. Sienna stood in the doorway like a question nobody wanted to answer. Her arms were tight across her chest, robe cinched so close it looked like she was holding herself together by the seams. Carl hovered near her, hands tucked into his pockets, shoulders caved inward like a man bracing for an old storm he helped create. I stepped deeper into the dining room, letting my eyes settle on the table, a polished cherrywood set I gave them as a housewarming gift years back. Sienna always bragged about how expensive it looked, even though she never bothered asking where it came from. My fingers drifted across the smooth surface, stopping at a small dent near the edge. A dent Carl made when he dropped a toolbox while fixing a loose leg. It felt like touching a scar, a memory with a pulse. Sienna's voice cut through the air. So, since you own the house again, what? You gonna toss us out? Make us homeless? Humiliate us the way you think we did to you? Her tone rose, but underneath it, fear trembled like a loose thread ready to unravel. She glanced at Carl, seeking support, but he stared at the wall like he wished he could fold himself into it. I didn't raise my voice, didn't lift my chin, didn't do anything but rest my palm on that dent in the table. You got something to say, I murmured, say it plain. Sienna let out a sharp breath and stepped forward, eyes bright with something brittle. Fine. I never liked it when Carl brought me around y'all. Everything felt so small. I didn't want to marry into a family that looked poor. Carl flinched, like the words slapped him. She kept going, like she'd been saving this confession for a moment when she felt cornered. I told him he needed to act better, speak better, lie better. I told him you'd hold him back. You and that old farmhouse. You and your tiny holidays. You and your hand-me-down everything. Her voice cracked. Anger, shame, something twisted between the two. He listened to me because he wanted to look like he came from more than this. I didn't move, but my breath settled deeper in my chest. Pride will make a person climb a ladder that ain't leaned on nothing. You thought money made you somebody. I said quietly, thought expensive furniture and a bright porch light could cover a shaky heart. Sienna's jaw trembled. I just wanted to look like I belonged somewhere. And in the process, I said, you pushed him away from where he already did. Carl looked at me then, eyes wet, guilt written across every inch of him. Mama, I'm sorry, he whispered. I let her talk louder than the voice you put in me. I touched the dent again, feeling the story inside it. That's the thing about pride, I said softly. It'll make you forget the hands that fed you and chase the ones that only point. Sienna's face folded in on itself. Real fear now, not attitude. The kind that comes when the truth finally catches up. Before she could speak, my phone vibrated in my pocket. A single buzz. Sharp. Purposeful. I pulled it out slowly, eyes on the screen, heart settling into a steady rhythm as I answered. Ma'am, Langston said, his voice like calm thunder. The trust is officially yours again. I exhaled, once deep, and let the words spread through the room like light cutting into shadow. And that's exactly where the moment ended. The living room felt different the moment I stepped fully inside it. This wasn't the room that shut its door on me. This wasn't the room that watched Sienna wrinkle her nose at my smoke-stained clothes. No, this was now a room waiting for truth to settle into its corners. Carl stood near the hallway, shoulders rounded, eyes wet, nodding like a man who finally understood he'd been moving backward in a house meant to move him forward. Sienna lingered beside the sofa, arms crossed, breathing sharp through her nose like she could hold her world together if she tightened her chest enough. I stepped into the center of the room. The wooden floor dipped slightly under my weight. Old houses always show their memories. The afternoon light poured through the windows behind me, casting my shadow long across the rug like the past had decided to stand up with me. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't need to. Some words don't require volume. They just require truth. I'm not throwing you out, I said. Carl exhaled a shaky breath, relief flooding him so fast his knees looked ready to buckle. He nodded again and again, hands trembling at his sides like he wanted to reach for me, but didn't know how. Sienna didn't move. Not a blink, not a shift, just a stillness full of resentment. I let my gaze settle on her, but I didn't point, didn't call her name, didn't shame her. I just let my voice drop, clean, calm, heavy, like dropping truth on linoleum and letting it ring. But you will not talk to me like a stray dog again. The air thickened. The house seemed to inhale. Carl bowed his head, nodding harder, tears sliding down his cheeks with no sound behind them. Sienna's chin lifted. Not high, just enough to show she didn't like the shift of power in the room. Her eyes darted across the space, as if checking to see if the walls still belonged to her. You can stay here, I continued, because I'm not here to break what's already cracked. But the days of you looking down on me in a house meant to bless you, those days are done. Carl sobbed, quietly, wiping his face with the back of his wrist. Yes, Mama, he whispered. I understand. But Sienna folded her lips thin and breathed through her nose like someone stealing air they suddenly had to share. This is ridiculous, she snapped finally. We didn't do anything to deserve being threatened. I cut my eyes to her, slow and steady. Not angry, just certain. There's a difference between raising your voice, I said, and raising your spirit. What you did at that door, that was spirit. That was how you feel about me when nobody's watching. And now you gotta live in the same house with the truth you tried to hide. She stiffened. Her fingers tightened around her robe ties until her knuckles blanched. Carl reached for her shoulder, but she jerked away from him as if his touch carried shame she didn't want to acknowledge. Carl, she hissed, voice cracking, you're just going to accept this? You're just going to let her walk in and take everything back? Carl turned toward her, and something in his expression finally hardened, not in cruelty, but clarity. She ain't taking anything, he said softly. She's reclaiming what we took for granted. Sienna stared at him like she didn't recognize the man she married. Her breath quickened. Her eyes glistened, not with remorse, but with panic wrapped in pride. I'm not living like this. Her voice was barely a whisper now. She spun on her heel, storming down the hallway. Cabinet doors slammed. Drawers yanked open. The sound of fabric being shoved into a bag cut through the house like a warning. Carl closed his eyes, shoulders sinking. A moment later, Sienna appeared again, duffel bag slung over her shoulder, hair wild from rushing, chest rising and falling like she'd just run up a hill she wasn't prepared for. She glared at me once, sharp enough to cut paper. Then she walked past Carl without touching him, without even looking, and headed straight for the door. The bag bounced against her side, and that's where the moment ended. The house settled into a strange quiet after Sienna left, an emptiness that didn't echo, but breathed. Afternoon light drifted through the windows in long, slow strokes, touching the walls like it was trying to soften what had just cracked open inside them. Carl wiped his face with the back of his sleeve, then straightened his shoulders like a man trying to rebuild something with his bare hands. He didn't talk much at first, just moved. Quietly, he walked to the doorframe, the same one I once stood outside of, and tightened a loose hinge. Didn't ask for tools, just found them. The soft clink of metal against the screws filled the silence like a confession. Every twist of the screwdriver looked like him piecing his dignity back together. When he finished with the hinge, he checked the porch railing, the one I held onto when shame tried to drag me down those steps. He sanded a rough spot with slow, measured strokes. Didn't look at me. Didn't look away either. A small moment, but a real one. Inside, he moved to the kitchen, pulled out a skillet, washed his hands twice, chopped onions with watery eyes, not from the sting, but from everything sitting behind it. He seasoned the pan the way I used to show him when he was younger, shaking the salt with careful hands so the food didn't taste bitter. "Sit down, Mama," he murmured, voice steadying with each word. "Let me fix you a plate." I sat slowly, easing into the chair near the head of the table. The old purse Sienna left behind still hung on the back of the seat across from me. Beige leather, fancy buckle, still smelling like her perfume. It looked untouched, frozen in time, like it was waiting for a woman who wasn't coming back for more than her clothes. Seeing it sitting there, lonely and upright, brought a heaviness to the room. Not regret, but truth settling into its rightful place. Dinner sizzled. The aroma of butter and garlic filled the air, winding around memories of cheaper meals we once shared, rice and beans, chicken legs, biscuits from scratch, lunches packed into little foil pouches. He used to watch me cook, sitting at this same table, swinging his legs, asking 100 questions at once. Now he set a plate in front of me. Simple food, humble food, food made by a son, remembering who taught him how to eat. He pulled out the chair beside mine, not across the room, not hiding, not pacing, and sat quietly, not slumped, not embarrassed, just present. We ate together in silence at first. Not the cold kind, not the angry kind, just a silence that makes space for something new to grow. Carl cleared his throat. "I'm trying, Mama. I know I hurt you. I know I let her guide me into acting like you wasn't." His voice broke in two. He stared at his plate. Then he pushed the food away gently, as if he didn't deserve it. "A mother's forgiveness don't erase a bruise," I said, letting the words rise slow from my chest. "It just stops it from bleeding." He nodded hard, eyes shining again. "Thank you," he whispered, "for not giving up on me." I watched him, not as a grown man, not as a failure, not as a victim of his wife's pride, but as my child. A child who'd lost his way and finally found enough courage to sit beside the woman he disappointed. The purse across from us remained untouched, a reminder of choices made in haste and lessons waiting to be learned. Its presence filled the empty spot at the table, the same way guilt fills a quiet room, without asking permission. Carl wiped his mouth, straightened his shoulders, and said, "Mama, I'll make this right. Whatever it takes. I set my fork down and turned toward him fully. We ain't done talking, I said, and that's where the moment ended. The dishes sat rinsed in the sink, a soft clatter settling behind us as the last bit of dinner faded into the air. Evening light washed through the window, warm and gold, stretching across the table like the sun was trying to touch the parts of us that still needed healing. Carl sat beside me, elbows on his knees, fingers laced tight like he was bracing for a truth he already knew but hadn't heard out loud. I looked at him, not at the man he'd grown into, not at the mistakes he'd made, not at the shame sitting heavy in his shoulders, but at the boy he once was, the boy who held my hand crossing the street, the boy who slept on my chest during thunderstorms, the boy who asked me once if loving somebody meant never letting them stand outside alone. That boy hadn't been gone, just buried under pride he didn't know how to carry. I took a breath, slow and steady, letting it fill the room with the weight of everything I'd held back. Carl, I began, my voice thick with the kind of truth that don't apologize for existing. I didn't need that house. His head snapped up a little, eyes red but focused. I kept going. I gave it to you because I wanted you to start life better than I did. I wanted you and your wife to have something solid beneath your feet. I wanted you to feel what it felt like to wake up in a place that was yours, where you could build something without worrying about rent or landlords or notes slid under the door. The words dropped heavy between us, southern, final, unpolished in a way that made them real. He swallowed hard. Mama? I raised a hand gently, stopping him. And you? I said, letting every syllable land where it needed to. You let somebody talk you into believing I ain't worth opening a door for. His face crumpled, like something inside him broke in a clean line. I'm sorry, he whispered, voice trembling. I ain't got nothing to defend it with. I forgot myself. I forgot you. I felt the tremor in his words, felt the regret pulling him apart. But more than that, I felt the truth finally settling into the cracks between us. He reached for my hand, slow, shaky, uncertain. When his fingers touched mine, it was the same grip he had as a child, small, seeking, clinging to something steady. His thumb rubbed the back of my hand like he was trying to memorize it all over again. Mama, he whispered, I don't want to lose you. I let him hold on. Not for him, for both of us. The house groaned softly as the night wind pressed against it, the floors adjusting with a long, familiar sigh. The purse Sienna left behind still hung off the chair in the corner, quiet, abandoned, a reminder that some people choose pride over peace, even when the blessing is bigger than their ego. Carl breathed in deep, shoulders shaking with the weight of the moment. The boy inside the man was trying to come home. Look at me, I said softly. He lifted his chin. I don't want revenge. I told him. I don't want no courtroom. I don't want no shouting. I just want respect. I want to feel like the door I knocked on belongs to family and not strangers. His face folded and tears slid down without sound. I'll earn it back. Every bit of it. I nodded, slow and sure. We gonna start fresh, I said. He squeezed my hand tighter, hope pressing through his fingers like blood returning to a numb limb. The room settled into a softer quiet, one that didn't sting, the kind that lets forgiveness breathe without rushing it. I stood up slowly, letting my hand slide from his, and walked toward the front hallway. He followed with his eyes, afraid to speak, afraid to break whatever new thing had just formed between us. I turned back, voice steady, the same voice that carried me through fire and humiliation and into myself again. Tomorrow, I said, letting the words stretch just enough to settle deep. I'm moving here. Morning came gentle, like God was carrying the sun in cupped hands. I stood at the edge of the walkway, a small overnight bag resting by my feet. The same house that once shut its door on me waited now with its curtains open, light spilling through the windows like a welcome I didn't ask for, but finally earned. Carl stepped out first, shirt tucked, hair neat, eyes softer than they had been in years. I got your bag, Mama, he said quietly, not out of guilt, not out of fear, but out of respect, the kind a child gives when they finally see the person who raised them clear as day. He picked up the bag, like it weighed more than fabric and zippers. Maybe to him it did. Maybe he carried every mistake inside it as he lifted it over his shoulder. Langston stood a few steps behind, hands folded in front of him. He didn't try to take the bag. He didn't try to walk me to the door. He just stood there, giving me the kind of distance that honors a moment instead of crowding it. Take your time, Miss Geneva, he said softly. His voice wasn't pitiful, wasn't proud, just steady, like a reminder that restoration don't need an audience. It just needs truth. I walked forward one step at a time, feeling the porch boards beneath my feet, boards I once backed away from, boards that once felt like a judgment. Now, they felt different, not forgiving, just honest. The screen door creaked as Carl opened it for me. That sound traveled through the house like a memory brushing against new paint. I crossed the threshold slow, letting my fingers glide across the frame. Not claiming victory, claiming belonging. I ain't homeless no more. I whispered, I'm home. Then the words rose up in me stronger, fuller, rooted deep the way Southern truth always is. And it got my name on it this time. Carl's breath caught, just a soft sound, but enough to paint the whole room with understanding. Inside, the living room looked warm, lived in, real. The blue blanket still rested on the couch. The dent on the table still waited where my fingertips had touched it. Nothing had changed except the weight of the air, lighter now, like the house finally aligned with the heart walking inside it. Carl set my bag near the hallway, then turned toward me slowly. Mama, thank you, he murmured. I placed a hand on his cheek, thumb brushing the spot where tears had dried the night before. Don't thank me, I said. Just live right. His eyes shut for a moment, long enough to swallow a promise. I stepped out onto the porch before sitting, letting the wooden seat, old, painted, familiar, take the weight off my body. The morning breeze pushed across my skin gentle and warm, the same way it used to kiss me when I sat on my farmhouse porch looking out across my land. Different home, same heart. I looked across the yard, sun warming the grass in soft streaks. The world felt steadier than it had in days. I folded my hands in my lap and let the breeze settle my spirit the way only the quiet can. Behind me, the house breathed like it was finally in sync with the woman sitting outside it. Carl moved quietly through the kitchen, fixing something, cleaning something, repairing something, steps of a son trying to shape his home around respect instead of pride. Langston watched from the driveway a moment longer before nodding once and heading toward his car, not leaving me, just giving me room to step back into myself. The morning air curled around my ears. The porch groaned softly beneath me. The world felt full, not of wealth or power or revenge, but something simpler. Dignity. My dignity. Returned. I closed my eyes, letting gratitude rise slow from my chest like warm water. Thank you, Lord, I whispered, lips barely moving. Not for revenge, but for giving me back my name.